And do you want me to start recording?
It does it automatically.
Okay.
So now you have people joining us.
For those of you guys just joining us, we'll get started in a few minutes. We're just letting everybody roll in. We got about 2 minutes left. Okay, I guess we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining Link's first Zoom conference for 2020. My name is Christina and I'm on Link and I'm the Independent Immobility Specialist. I am here to introduce Lane, who is going to be our speaker today. She's a certified professional in accessibility core competencies. And I'm going to go ahead and let her take it from here.
Great, thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day today to explore the case for digital accessibility as part of this storefront to web accessibility series for the conference. Nick and I are both pretty excited to be joining you all and to share all of this information. I will apologize in advance. You'll periodically see my video mute as I attempt to blow my nose. The smoke is getting to me, like I'm sure many are experiencing. And while medication helps, it's not always perfect. So I will apologize in advance for that. And I promise to mute my audio. I do, so you don't have to hear me blow my nose either. If you would like to follow along with our PowerPoint, Nick has just put in the text chat a link to Google Drive, where you can find a copy of the PowerPoint presentation in PowerPoint as well as Google Slides formats. So you can follow along in there, and there are links in the slides. As we progress, Nick will also be, well, one of us, depending on who's talking, will be tossing those in the chat for you as well, so you can check out additional resources as you go. And we also encourage, if you're able and have comments or questions, to go ahead and put those in the text chat if you're able, or the Q&A. And Christina, do they have the ability to raise a hand as well?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
And I will, if there's any questions, I will definitely let you know and ask the questions.
All right, fabulous. Thank you so much. As Christina mentioned, I am Lane Amaro. I have lived in Boise for coming up on 12 years now, 12 or 13 years now. I have a master's in assistive technology and human services, as well as a certificate in accessibility core competencies. CPAC is the acronym for that, CPACC. In addition, I have 10 years of experience working in vocational rehabilitation and doing assistive technology evaluations for individuals who are blind or low vision in their employment situations, in their home, to find assistive technology. And then the 5 years additional experience doing specifically digital accessibility work. So I've been in the physical environment, I've been in the digital environment. I also bring to the table a unique perspective as an individual who's blind and who uses the very assistive technologies that others with disabilities are going to be using as well to access your digital content. So you will get the opportunity to experience and hear what people who are blind hear when they engage with different content.
And hello, everyone. Again, just wanted to say thank you for joining us today. My name is Nicholas Stallings. I'm with the Idaho Assistive Technology Project. I am a we already got messages coming in here. I apologize here from Mr. Ian Bott. Hello, Mr. Bott. I'm glad you made it. Go Vandals, don't forget. Yes, I am with the Idaho Assistive Technology Project with the University of Idaho, where we are a grant-funded project under the Center on Disabilities and Human Development through the College of Education. I'm a lending library coordinator / AT specialist. I have more than 10 years working with people with disabilities in all different capacities. My focus here at the center or at the project is computer access, deafblindness, and web accessibility. I don't have I don't know anything that I'm doing. I just kind of go with the flow, but I'm definitely a jack of all trades and a master of none. And I do what I can here to support Lane and make sure that we are educating, the population about what we can do to better support people with disabilities on the web, online, and things like that. So thank you again.
And if you haven't noticed, both Nick and I are a little bit laid back, not real formal, and we will be rolling with things today. We may encounter some technical challenges as I have to stop sharing and start sharing and that kind of thing as well. So be prepared for probably some silliness. So kind of our objective today, as this is a series, we are not going to dig in too deeply into the weeds of digital accessibility, but we want to talk about what accessibility is, explore the parallels between the accessibility of storefronts and physical spaces as compared to your web front or your digital spaces. We want to identify at least 4 benefits to digital accessibility and how that can benefit your business or your personal brand if you happen to be an individual who's rather than a business or an organization joining us today. And we want to help you identify the first steps towards becoming an accessible company or accessible brand. And hopefully we'll have time to even get you guys working on your own accessibility statement to kind of keep the momentum going and really start to get that ball rolling and start really taking those steps towards an accessible digital culture for your company. So in short, accessibility is the ability to access. That could be your physical or your digital space. And Stephen Krug, who wrote Don't Make Me Think, a common sense approach to web accessibility, simply says that it is not just the right thing to do, but it is profoundly the right thing to do. Because the one argument for accessibility that doesn't get made nearly often enough is how extraordinarily better it makes some people's lives. So hopefully throughout this week, throughout this series, you will find some tools and strategies to put in your own toolbox to help make other people's lives better. And how awesome is that to be able to do that just as a part of your everyday work? And hopefully without a whole lot of extra work. So like I said, accessibility simply is the ability to access. So you're thinking about what experience do you want people to have with your information, with your brand, with your store? And does the environment, whether that's physical or digital, does the environment allow for everyone to have that experience that you want them to have? The image here of a flight of stairs next to an escalator is an example that we might be accustomed to seeing in the physical space. And we all know the experience is very different between climbing stairs and hopping on an escalator. And it all depends on the flight of stairs as well. I'm thinking of the Boise Town Square Mall at the moment, and I'll take the escalator any day than those stairs in the center, where I always inevitably end up on the inside of the spiral and can't keep my whole foot on the step, or yeah, it turns into a bit of a mess. But you got to think about the experience that you want people to have. And do you want it to be, more of an physical exertion and really active engagement, or something a little bit more passive as well? So as we move through all of this, be thinking about your environment and the experience that you want customers to have in the physical environment, the digital environment, with your brand, with your information. When we talk about storefront accessibility, this is your customer's ability to access the physical space. It's all about that, physically navigating the space. Can people walk through the front door? Can people walk around the store without encountering significant obstacles? Can people use signage to find what they'd like? The U.S. Access Board has created, and Nick, if you could toss this link in, thank you, toss that link in initially. The U.S. Access Board has created some standards and guidelines for Title III, so of the ADA, so public accommodations, and what businesses need to do in order to make their physical spaces as accessible. The link that Nick tossed in there in the text chat is a tremendous asset to any architect who is building a new space, but it is also valuable for store owners and managers who are setting up displays and that sort of thing, to be looking at and considering, if I put this really gorgeous display smack in the middle of the aisle, are people with wheelchairs going to be able to get around to the side, either side of it? Or I, as an individual who's blind, I cannot tell you how many times I've gone into a business and the display has been glass shelves on metal wiring, or it's included a mirror, and my cane finds it, my shoulder finds it, because I'm just not expecting anything in the middle of the walkway. So these guidelines can help with that. And it's not just about the architects, it's also about those of you who are creating that in-store experience.
So just to kind of drive home this experience, we figured give you some examples of, things that someone with a disability would come across in our physical spaces, but thinking about how those can apply to our electronic spaces. So, I mean, here we have an example. We have a sign that basically says wheelchair access around the back of building. And we have another picture, an example of a tennis court with an accessible ramp. Two very simple things, right? Granted, they're providing some support for an individual with a disability, but what's the experience going to be like? What exactly are you getting them? Elaine, if you want to hit the next one. So we talk about ramps. Another thing we talk about are doors, right? On the left here, we have, those circle hand door knobs. Those are really tough to navigate for people to use, especially, I know myself when I'm carrying things, compared to the picture on the right, which is an accessible door handle, accessible lock as well. That little lock can slide both ways. So that experience, it comes down to what you actually want the individual to experience. Lane, I think we have one more after this, right?
Yep, and when we think about doors and ramps, you're also thinking, can they even get through the front door? Can everyone get through your front door? That is really important to consider.
Perfect. Another good example of when you're talking about signs, right? On the left, we have a welcome sign with Braille that was actually printed. You know, it was printed in Braille. I'm sure the intentions were great, but if it's not embossed, someone who is blind or low vision isn't going to be able to access that sign, right? And so you can kind of look to the right as this one actually has two bad examples as well, but the difference between high contrast and high visibility versus low contrast and vibration and colors and things like that. So it's important to take all of that into consideration when you're designing these spaces and making sure that you're providing, you know, opportunity for everyone across the board.
And people then wonder, well, how does this translate into my web space? Because the physical environment, there are things that you've put in place to accommodate assistive technology users, wheelchair ramps for people who are using walkers, scooters, wheelchairs. I talked about making enough space for people to get around displays with that assistive technology. You're making accommodations in the physical environment. And a lot of people know that individuals with disabilities are probably going to be using some sort of assistive technology tool to access their digital environment. So individuals who are blind or low vision, for example, might use magnifiers, or I'm using a screen reader, and you'll get to see a brief demonstration of that here in just a moment. But you may not be thinking that the reader on the other end of your web page, your blog, your social media posts, if your brand, you know, it's a personal brand, you may not be thinking about the user on the other end who might be using an assistive technology. In the digital environment, it's all about text. It's about being able to see and hear the information that's on the screen. And for most people, you've probably figured out that our digital environment is pretty visual. You're not going to be able to reach through your screen and feel the letters on my screen. You know, if we were doing cooking, you wouldn't be able to smell what I was cooking. So it's all about the senses of seeing and hearing. As I mentioned, well, the US Access Board is another tremendous resource for guidelines on how to make those digital environments more accessible. But the biggest thing is having text alternatives for anything you can see or hear. And it's super important to remember that looks can be deceiving. And this is where we might run into our first technical glitch. I'm going to have to stop sharing and restart in just a moment so that you can hear the screen reader as well. Okay.
Started screen share. Mute. Currently.
All right, so you heard Tom pop in there. My extra voice said I was screen sharing, informed me that you can see my screen again, and let me know that I was unmuted, thankfully.
Task switching. Power
For those of
slide.
you who are able to see this slide, you're able to see the text white on black on the left that says looks can be deceiving. And you can also see on the right-hand side more text.
Google Share.
I'm going to show you guys what my screen reader tells me is on this slide, though.
Heading level 1 looks are deceiving. Heading level 1 looks are deceiving.
That's all it tells me is heading level 1 looks are deceiving. It only reads that white text on a black background. This is because the text on the right is an image.
Slide 13 dash dash.
So advance to slide 13 here, as my screen reader just announced for you. And I will go through the same slide, but with the text alternative for the image included.
The issue with web accessibility is the fact that blind and visually impaired people need the single biggest boost to achieve equivalence since the real world image. Web is a visual medium. Joe Clark image.
So it read the text and it told me it was also an image.
Heading level 1 looks are deceiving.
And then it reads the text on the left. And why it's doing it backwards, I'm not really sure. But this is just one example of how looks can be deceiving. If you did not know that that was an image, you would not know that people who could not see it could not access it without that text alternative. In this case, it's specifically called alt text. And as we will learn on Wednesday with the Intro to Accessible Visuals, there is a difference between a text alternative and alternative text or alt text. There are other places where text alternatives can be very helpful as well. And so I've got to stop sharing again.
Meeting control. Here's
and all right, we are gonna, bear with me here. The screen reader is probably going to.
Started screen share. You are muted. V3 final edit. PowerPoint meeting controls. Unmute. Currently. Mute. Currently
All right, I accidentally muted myself there.
PowerPoint slideshow. V3 final edit. City Lights survey left bracket. Welcome to City Lights left bracket. Inaccessible home page right bracket dash.
The World Wide Web Consortium is the home of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And these are the foundation for the guidelines presented by the US Access Board for Digital Accessibility. They have this website to see kind of before and after. So this homepage for City of Lights, there's some short news stories. I think one of them is shortage of brains hinders research or something along those lines. And these stories can be viewed, you can visually scan the page and see the different text that separates the different pieces of information. Visually, this text is being organized in a way that you can quickly find what you need. For someone who's a screen reader user, we would be looking for headings, because that's what that color and font changes tell you as a visual reader, that this is like a heading or a headline for a story. So we would look for headings. On this page, however, you'll find that there's only one.
Wrapping to top. Inaccessible home page before and after demonstration heading level 1. Wrapping to top. Inaccessible.
That is my only heading. So without being able to quickly jump among those headings, I can't skim read and pick which of those stories that I want to read.
Task switching. Meeting control. PowerPoint slide. V3 5. City Lights survey. Welcome to City Lights. Accessible home page.
Here's the accessible version of that home page, where there are more headings.
Elsewhere on the web heading level 2. City Lights concert heading level 2.
So now I'm down at the City Lights concert heading, so I could read about that now.
Free penguins playing on stage graphic.
And there's alt text there, 3 penguins playing on stage graphic. It read that alt text to me.
Free penguin slogan at zoo benefit concert causes confusion among city rockers. Adjective or verb?
I know that was a very confusing example, but that is one example of what's similar to having an accessible sign in your physical environment. Those headings are critical for finding what you need to on the web page, just like your accessible signs are critical to finding what you need in your physical environment. Similarly,
task meeting PowerPoint V3 final edit City Lights survey accessible survey welcome to City Lights meeting PowerPoint V3 City Lights survey.
I apologize for all the extra speech there, but I apparently don't have the inaccessible survey up. So I'll show you how here though.
Retype email, edit, name, edit, virtual piece, City.
When there is a form, there are not always text labels.
Explore site by top go button. None radio button and not
So this first one, I
Citylite
just checked
server.
a box that says to the left of the word none. Visually, there is a label, but sometimes these forms don't have the text label in the background, and that is also important so that the individual knows what they're going to be typing. And again, we'll dig more into that when we get into introduction to accessible visuals.
Welcome to meeting
I'm going
controls.
to turn things over to Nick here as I kind of clean up on my side.
All right, you guys see my PowerPoint here? All right, good to go. Okay, so we're just going to talk a little bit about the benefits of digital accessibility, and when we're talking about your website. And of course, the best place to start with the benefits is that you're complying with the law, right? This is what we talk a lot about, is when it comes to what the law says and how we're going to relate that to our day-to-day operations. So the first things we'd like to talk about, just as a reminder, was of course the ADA. We're at 30 years today, or this year. And as a reminder, came out in 1990 and prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. So you can kind of assume and kind of see where that's going to lead into, and we will talk about it a little bit, but lead into websites and accessibility on your websites. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, as well as the reauthorization, I believe, of 1998, the Workforce Investment Act. It just requires all federal agencies to develop, procure, maintain, and use information and communications technology, ICT, we've talked about that a little bit, that is accessible to people with disabilities, regardless of whether or not they work at the federal government. So this was an opportunity to say that everything needs to be accessible if the federal government's going to be involved. And then Section 255 of the Telecommunications Act, I believe is 1997 off the top of my head, requires all telecommunication products and services to be accessible to people with disabilities. And this is required to the extent access is readily achievable, meaning easily accomplishable and without much difficulty. Now, if you have any experience with working with accessibility, you know that it's that part about readily achievable can be debated, but things are getting better, and that's where you have people like myself and Lane who are self-proclaimed, although Lane has definitely proven this, professionals in this area. We can help you make these things accessible. It does take some time to practice, but once you get the hang of it, you know, we understand how difficult it is. But really, the big thing we're talking about here is the legal risk and the subsequent laws that go along with that. And as an example, we figured we would talk a little bit about a case study, that being Winn-Dixie. This was brought to court where blind customers were unable to access information on the website. So we were talking about things like the store locator, the coupons that the store had available on the website, store events, any specials that they were only showing on the website. Winn-Dixie had requested that requested a dismissal. The website is not a public accommodation, is not a public space, but unfortunately the courts, fortunately, the courts did rule against that. They did find that there is a link between the store and the site, and thus the website is covered as a public accommodation. One of the things, the site must be made accessible, is what they ended up doing. One of the things they brought down was having an inaccessible website violates Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and as well as a business is required to make its website accessible, relying on the WC3C, World Wide Web Consortium, guidelines, also known as the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I believe.
Nick,
There
we
we
do
go.
have a question.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and take a
The
break.
question is, how about accessibility to meetings by Zoom meetings, that is setting up Zoom meetings, Idaho Human Rights Commission or DOJ complaint?
How about accessibility?
That
So
was
what?
Eric.
Yeah, so Eric, I think I see where you're coming here. So where we get into it, and Lane can help me out here, is that Zoom actually has all of these abilities, whether we're talking about closed captioning, or we're talking about an opportunity to bring in an interpreter for those who might be deaf or hard of hearing. Zoom provides those things. Then it's up to the individual or the agency to be implementing those things. And this is where we can kind of help guide those deals and kind of support that, is making sure that things are going to be, correct by the law standards. Now, as far as setting up complaints and things like that, I believe that would go through Lane. You have
Typically, the Department of Justice.
That's what I figured.
The Human Rights Commission focus has not been on digital accessibility, and if complaints have been getting sent to the Idaho Human Rights Commission, they get kicked back to the complainant to be sent to the DOJ, Department of Justice. I do know that Disability Rights Idaho has also supported some of the accessibility complaints as well, particularly as it relates to voting because of their grant funding. But Disability Rights Idaho is another place to go when it comes to a point of actually, as an individual, filing a complaint.
So Eric, I'll give you a second if you wanted to add anything to that. Hopefully it answers your question there. Sure we're not missing anyone else. Okay. All right, so continuing on with the Winn-Dixie case, the court ended up requiring that Winn-Dixie adopt and post an explicit accessibility policy, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later today, to ensure the persons with disabilities have full and equal enjoyment of its website, and shall accompany the public policy statement with an accessible means of submitting accessibility questions and problems. So basically they said we're going to open up to the public and make sure that we're available for those conversations, that we're going to have our accessibility policy online as well. Another thing they were required to do is conduct annual accessibility trainings for IT and web staff so that they can learn to create and maintain content that meets that WCAG criteria, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And the third thing, and it's interesting with the implications, is that to make sure that any third-party applications or content posted to the Winn-Dixie site must also meet WCAG requirements. So not only did it say that the website had to meet this, but that anyone that they're linking to needs to be able to meet this as well. And so it's an opportunity to say, yes, we are going to take accessibility seriously, the court's saying, and that it is a public space. It is accessible to the public and should be accessible to everyone in the public. And I think here, so Lane, would you like me to stop the share and let you take back over here?
Yep, we can do that. And I'll just add, as Nick stops sharing there, I will add that the Winn-Dixie was the kind of a landmark case with the Department of Justice. It was the first case that was taken to the Department of Justice and that was heard in court, and it has been upheld. I can't remember when that was, but it was at least 10 years ago now. And I want to make sure you guys don't hear my screen reader when I come back on screen share. I know the screen reader is overwhelming, but the Winn-Dixie case was the first. And just last year in 2019, it was upheld with the same rulings through when a blind consumer filed a complaint against Domino's Pizza as well. And it extended the coverage not to just their website, but their apps for iPhone, iPad as well. There was a pizza deal that was available only if you ordered through the Domino's app on your phone. And that was the sticking point. He couldn't get that deal if he called into the store or ordered on the website. It could only be granted if he was using the app, and the app was not accessible. So even as near as last year in 2019, the Department of Justice continued to uphold this ruling. So even though the Americans with Disabilities Act does not explicitly say that websites and applications are considered public accommodations, Department of Justice rulings continually uphold that they do fall under public accommodation. Even if there's not a physical store. Netflix is another great example of this. And there was a lawsuit against Netflix as well, because Netflix does not have a physical location. It is a web-based service only. And the Department of Justice ruled in that case as well that those digital assets were covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So as you consider whether or not digital accessibility is a benefit to you in mitigating legal risk, definitely take into consideration which of those civil laws might apply to your personal brand, your organization as a nonprofit, or a small business. We try not to spend a whole lot of time on the legal risk because neither of us are lawyers. Don't want to be either. I'm not going back to school. So I like to focus on some of these other benefits. They are a little bit more tangible and they are a lot less scary. So one of the other benefits is protecting and enhancing your brand. Social responsibility is a very, very common term in our world right now. And socially responsible companies have a tendency to attract and retain customers willing to pay a premium. So this might include, individuals, customers without disabilities, who they're willing to pay a premium for your products and services if they know that you are inclusive, or that a part of their purchase is going to support your efforts to include everyone. I saw a study recently, and I didn't include it here, said that millennials in particular, when they start looking for careers and applying for jobs as well, social responsibility is something that they value in a potential employer. And inclusion of people with disabilities is included in that. Along those lines, social responsible companies also empower employees to do good. They're going to encourage their employees to volunteer, to donate time, etc., which in turn fosters employee morale and productivity. Barclays is a pretty good example of how their brand was enhanced and even improved upon once they made a commitment to digital accessibility. In their efforts, they found that once disabled customers found that their products and services were accessible, they were very reluctant to switch to any Barclays competitors because they were fearful of losing access. Making products accessible also drew employees with disabilities to apply for jobs with their company. This in turn has the effect of increasing the accessibility of your customer-facing products, because if you find that your employee portals are not accessible and you make efforts to make those more accessible, that translates to your customers as well. And this is what Barclays figured out, and they have a very loyal customer base now. And along those lines, you can increase market share with an accessible physical or digital space even. It's important to consider that you could be missing out on, oh gosh, what does it say here? $200 billion annually. The market of individuals with disabilities and their families has discretionary funding of $200 billion in the US, or $7 trillion if you happen to have the ability to tap that worldwide market. That's very, very huge. And further examples, in 2011, the FCC regulatory changes prompted NPR to provide transcripts of all of their archived recordings. This increased traffic to their website by almost 7%. That's a pretty significant impact, and that was all driven by the fact that their audio is also now available in text. So when people do a Google search, their archived content is more likely to pop up. So some in the audience might be familiar with the term search engine optimization. Having text examples or text alternatives to anything you can see or hear that is not already text can drive traffic to your digital assets. And in a 2019 study by Accenture, it was found that companies with an inclusive working environment, so for an environment that was inclusive to employees with disabilities, over the span of 3 years, 2015 to 2018, these companies had a 20% higher revenue, 30% greater profit margins, and twice the net incomes of comparable businesses. So that's a pretty significant financial benefit as well, just by having an environment that is accessible to employees with disabilities. And in the last two topics, when we've talked about the benefits of social responsibility and improving branding, as well as increasing your market share, you've probably noticed that there was a hint of this empowers innovation. And yes, it does. Having accessible content and digital assets prepares a company to be robust and to be able to adapt with the ever-changing digital environment. Who would have thought a year ago we'd be sitting here on Zoom to do this conference, right? So our digital space is constantly changing. And if you've been on Facebook lately, you're probably thinking, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But they're constantly improving that digital environment for us. Accessible design is by nature flexible, resulting in interactions that are more human-centered, natural, and contextual. So it's making sure that not just people with disabilities have access, but it improves the experience, that user experience for everyone. Just as an example from Google, their work to make images accessible using artificial intelligence is driving innovation in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence, as is their work to auto caption. We don't want to put people like Rhonda out of a job. We appreciate her very much. And right now, auto captioning is not nearly as good as she is, I promise. But the efforts in making auto captioning better is improving machine learning. And this is having benefits across the board. Many companies have automated a lot of different processes, including even accepting payments, because of the efforts in auto captioning and artificial intelligence, AI, which were initially created to give people with disabilities greater access. The same is true with things like autocomplete and voice control or speech to text, things that Google innovated specifically for people with disabilities that have now been adopted by probably all of us. I don't know very many people who don't take advantage of autocomplete and the dictation feature, particularly on their mobile phones. And one of the leaders at Google says that the accessibility problems are the mainstream breakthroughs of tomorrow. And that is very true with some of the innovations that I mentioned from Google specifically. I want to take a moment. Well, I've got two reasons to take a moment. I need a drink of water, but I also want to give you guys a chance to ask any questions about those benefits as well. have not heard any questions come in. Nick, did you have anything you wanted to add to the discussion of benefits before we move on to actually taking some steps towards accessing those benefits?
No, I think you hit it all. I mean, I guess going back to our examples of doors and ramps and things like that, I mean, how often do we use the automatic door buttons now, right? Especially, like I mentioned, carrying things and things like that. Is accessibility really does have implications further than just making sure someone can access it, that one person, right? It actually, accessibility does apply to all of us in some way. It all helps us in some way, so.
Even if that audible pedestrian signal does make you jump and want to run across the street when it starts beeping at you, it's still been helpful to a lot more people than just the blind people that it was installed for. So there's, and I don't know that we even think about the ramps and the automatic motion censored door options either. And many of those types of benefits that are designed for people with disabilities in the physical space.
So we have a comment. It says universal design for all. Definitely applies to all digital world too. Great examples and thank you.
Yes, very, very, very true. I was just about to bring up universal design. That's great to know that we have other people on that same kind of wavelength. It is very important in our physical and our digital spaces. A lot of people then, though, get overwhelmed. What are my first steps? How do I start? I want to make my company, my brand, my information accessible in my digital spaces as well. How do I do that? And there's a lot of strategy that goes into it. And sometimes it does feel like playing Jenga. This is why I've included the image of someone trying to pull a Jenga piece out of a Jenga puzzle, because sometimes you get going and you're like, wait, if I do this, it's going to cause all these other things to fall apart. So there's a lot of strategy that will go into moving forward with digital accessibility. Your very first steps will include creating accessibility policies and or statements, assigning different responsibilities to different people within the organization for accomplishing anything outlined in the policy. Of course, anytime you're assigning a responsibility, you're also thinking about who's gonna pay for that. So checking your existing budget and resources. You might have an IT professional on your staff who's already familiar with WCAG, the WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So evaluate your existing resources. Review the environment. Do an evaluation of your current digital assets and find out how accessible they already are. You may have been doing it and not even known it. And that includes reviewing your websites, as well as documents and anything you post on social media. And then establish a monitoring framework and quality assurance, which can include engaging stakeholders, finding people with disabilities to test out this different stuff or to give you feedback. And at that point, I would also encourage you to consider compensation for individuals who are helping out. This has become kind of a big thing in the community of people with disabilities as of late. I've seen it pop up on my social media, among my networks, as an individual with a disability who does a lot of this kind of accessibility testing. There are entities taking advantage of people with disabilities and saying, well, test this for me for free because I have no budget, and then actually not listening. I think where they get upset is that people aren't always listening when they give their feedback. Nothing ever changes either. So taking into consideration not only what you want that end experience to be for your customers, but what experience you want your testers to have as well, and engaging them in a meaningful way in that process, not just for them, but also for your content developers. The more I do this, the more time I spend with web developers, app developers, and we develop some pretty strong friendships because there is a mutual respect for our given areas of expertise. So once you get to that point, definitely keeping in mind that the individuals with disabilities you engage in that testing and evaluation framework, this is a very extensive area of expertise, just like an app developer would be as well. So let's take a look at that first step, creating a policy and/or accessibility statement. When we think about an accessibility policy, think about your scope, right? How much of this do you want it to cover? Do you need to take baby steps? Most of us do. Try to keep your policy simple. You can reference the standards and guidelines that you want to achieve. Web content accessibility, WCAG. Version 2, level A, is generally accepted as the standard at this point. That is what the ADA points to. That is what the US Access Board guidelines are founded on, though they go beyond the Worldwide Web Consortium, W3C guidelines. That's what they are based upon. So that is usually a good starting point, but you decide for yourself, because your experience, you may want it to be a bit more than just the industry standard. And that's what we mean by defined conformance levels. Version 2, level A, AA, or AAA. AAA is quite a bit more extensive than AA, but it also provides a bit more of an experience for the assistive technology user as well. Set your scope. Do you want it to apply to every aspect of your business, for your employees, for your customers, for your documents, for your website, for your social media? Do you want it to apply only to internal documentation and software? Do you want it to, how broad do you want this to be? And make sure that you consider procurement as a part of this. Nick mentioned in the Winn-Dixie case study that the courts ruled that any third-party applications or content on the Winn-Dixie website had to also be accessible. By third party, that means anything that they purchased. So Winn-Dixie, and a huge part of the Winn-Dixie case, was surrounding the chat feature on the website. They had paid a third-party company to create the chat experience, and it was not accessible. So consider purchasing in the policy as well. And then in that policy, you can also include the establishing and monitoring or quality assurance processes, if you wanted to. It can be as simple or as complex as you would like it to, and as it would apply to your particular situation, your individual brand, personal brands, nonprofit, that sort of thing. Public statements are a great way to go, in addition to the policy, because it announces to your customers and to your potential employees your commitment to social responsibility, if that is something that is of value to you and your organization. So you can include your commitment to accessibility, and you can include some of the basic policy things as well. So you can reference the standards and the conformance standards that we talked about, the conformance level. So in your policy, you could state in plain language that you have an inclusive business culture, or are socially responsible, however you want to phrase that, and then include the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0 AA, or whichever guidelines and conformance level you choose to pursue in the policy. It is also important to include contact information, so having a contact person, setting that responsibility in the policy of who individuals can contact when they're having challenges. And that could be a form on the website, or that could be an email or a phone number. Just making sure that whatever option that is also going to be accessible. So considering a phone number, would that be accessible to individuals who are unable to speak or hear? You might want to select a potentially different option, or provide both. If you've reached the point of doing an evaluation of your digital assets, it can also be valuable to include a list of your known limitations and things that you're trying to address. That way, it further demonstrates to the individuals with disabilities that you're actively working on it, and it could also prevent duplication of complaints or comments and suggestions for improvement. If your website has documents have to be viewed in a specific program, if your website is known to work best with Google Chrome, it's important to also include those details on an accessibility statement so that people with disabilities know that, oh, I'm using Firefox to access this website and they say it works best with Chrome. I should give that a shot before I call to complain, kind of thing. And of course, it's always optional, but you could include links and information about the federal civil laws that are applicable to your organization as well, and even provide your customers with the information on how to file complaints there if they chose to. Some companies do that, some do not. So all up to the individuals making those decisions. So we may not get to the point of actually practicing anything. We are coming up on 2 o'clock pretty quickly. But be sure that you're using plain language principles. The web content saying when you're referencing something that is a limitation, and you know that the videos on your website do not have closed captioning, you could say it. We know, you could say it along the lines of videos on our site do not have captions, or you could say WCAG criteria 1.2.2 has not been met on our website. I think people are going to be a little bit more apt to understand that, yeah, we know our videos don't have captions, than they would understanding that web criteria 1.2.2 was not met. So use that plain language when you're writing your accessibility statements. Keep that language simple. Other plain language principles to consider: use short sentences, use active voice, so type like you talk, and be conversational and approachable. If you want feedback, you got to be approachable. So a sample accessibility statement from City Lights Incorporated is committed to ensuring digital accessibility for people with disabilities. We are continually improving the user experience for everyone. And then it goes on to reference the specific web content accessibility guidelines and standards. There's a separate section for what level they'll be conforming to. So web content accessibility guidelines, WCAG, requirements for designers, and it goes on to explain that as well. And then it goes on to say that we know our website's only partially conformant, and then it provides the options for feedback. In this case, I don't think it shows on the text, but it shows contact information. They chose to use email rather than phone in their example. Idaho State Government Web Accessibility Statement is also pretty simple. Idaho.gov wishes to ensure accessibility of web resources for all users and has been developed for a wide variety of browsers and assistive technologies. So there they've stated their commitment, and they've told you their technical requirements. Goes on to talk about how the Idaho web portal has been designed to meet web publishing guidelines, but does admit that sites and links to sites outside of the portal may not be accessible. So it includes those limitations and is very conversational. I know we're coming up very quickly on 2 o'clock, but this does kind of wrap up what we had for you guys today. The rest of the week, we will dive a little bit deeper into understanding disabled users a little bit more. You've gotten a little bit of a taste of what it's like for someone who's blind, but we'll dig in a little bit more to that tomorrow. And then we'll talk about accessible visuals and accessible audio in the last 2 days. So do we have any questions for myself or for Nick?
That was really awesome. Thank you very much. I mean, like, I don't want to stop anyone from asking questions, but that was really fantastic. That's a discussion too, I felt like.
Thank you.
We have a few comments. Excellent job, everyone. Thank you so much.
Okay,
So
and we
I'd
can-
like to take the time right now to thank Nick and Lane. And we all want to make sure when you guys stay on and we do have a survey at the end, give us some feedback. It looks like Nick and Lane put on their contact information. So if you have any questions, please reach out to them. They've been great, giving us a little bit of insight of what they do. They are fantastic. Thank you guys.
Thank you for the opportunity. And again, I'm happy to stick around a little bit for questions if needed as well.
Yeah, I'll just add thank you guys for attending. We're happy to be here to help. And in the future, these next 3 days we will get a little bit more in depth when it comes to plain language, when it comes to what things someone with a disability is using in terms of assistive technology. We'll talk about that framework, how do you go about creating accessible content, things like that. We definitely want to give you something to use, and we're here to help if you have any questions. So don't hesitate to reach out.
So there was a comment from James. It says great information. I would have to agree.
Nick, could you toss our emails into text chat for people too?
Yeah,
for those who might not be
Go
able to
ahead
see the slide but can access text chat.
Go ahead and do it again, just in case.
And I don't know if we had any latecomers as well, but and I'm sure Lana and Christina will make the Google Drive link to the PowerPoint and Google Slides available as well. So if you feel like we went through some of this information pretty quick, you're welcome to go back and take a look at those as well. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.